All right. Good evening. Good evening, my friends. Scott here, checking in from Dallas, Texas, where I've been hanging out for the week. So it is Thursday night. It is 7 o'clock here in Dallas, uh, 8 o'clock back home in Ohio. So, what I'm going to attempt to do in this video is to address a painfully common verse that Adventists will throw out to prove a number of things. This passage here is used to attempt to try to address a couple things. One about eating pork and the ceremonial laws, and the other is the Sabbath in heaven. I've heard it used for that. So my intent tonight is to kind of try to look at this verse and see how is it really to be understood. So oftentimes Adventists will quote Isaiah 66 verses 16 and 17. But the bottom line is verse 17 is really the one that they're driving at. Maybe they're quoting 16 as well, just so it kind of looks like there's some context. So they're like, no, I've used two texts, so it's not proof texting. Okay, whatever. So this is verse 17 is the one that is in question. And so what I'd like to do is read this verse to you from a few different versions. Now, I'm not one of these people that gets caught up in what version of the Bible that you use. If you do, I'm sure you have your reasons for that. That's not my thing. I'm not caught up in all that. But I'm going to look at 5 different versions of this same verse. And so I want to read that to you first off. All right, so here we go. So Isaiah 66, verse 17. Those who sanctify and purify themselves to go into the gardens, following one in the midst, eating pig's flesh and the abomination and mice, shall come to an end together, declares the Lord. That is the English Standard Version. New King James Version reads like this. Those who sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go to the gardens after an idol in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse, shall be consumed together, says the Lord. They that sanctify themselves and purify them. Now, that was New King James. Here's King James. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind one tree in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse, shall be consumed together, saith the Lord. Here is the American Standard Version. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves to go into the gardens behind one in the midst, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse, they shall come to an end together, saith Jehovah. And finally, New International Version, which in this case I actually like the best personally. I used to read NIV, but I have an English Standard Version now. But for this case, I really like this version best. Those who consecrate and purify themselves to go into the gardens, following one who is among those who eat the flesh of pigs, rats, and other unclean things, they will meet their end together with the one they follow, declares the Lord. So that's the NIV. So that is the passage. Now, I don't know which version you tend to use, but the thing I'm going to say here is this. Before we try to tackle this text, there's a really important thing that we have to do first, and that is, and some of you might be thinking, well, is it context? Is it context? Context is really, really important for obvious reasons, and we're going to look at context. But the first question I'm going to ask is this a book of the Bible in which do I understand what type of writings I find here? Now, if you're wondering, what do you mean, what kind of writings do I find here? Well, would you agree with me that if I said to you, if we would read the Psalms or Proverbs, would you say that they are written in the same style as, say, Galatians? Probably not. You would probably acknowledge, no, well, Proverbs and Psalms are more poems or songs, and Galatians was a letter. Okay, fair enough. What about the Song of Solomon compared to, let's say, the Gospel of Luke? Again, no, you would agree. Well, no, because that is, the Song of Solomon there was a lot of symbolism, and it was a love story, or portions of it, but it's not really the same, because it was like the Gospel of Luke was more like a history, if you will. Okay. Now, understand something. I don't have my doctorate in theology from any big school. I didn't even study. I didn't go to college to study Bible or theology. I'm a layman. I have learned just through my own personal studies, through reading, through listening to sermons of other theologians and things like that. So I'm not claiming to be something I'm not. All right. But I don't think that you have to be a theologian to be able to acknowledge and to read these books and realize, wow, they're kind of different. They're kind of different. And if you understand that, when you go into it, you have to learn then that there are some rules that I have to abide by when I'm reading certain books, because I can't say, well, it says it right here, so it must mean that. That's simply not the case. Because depending upon the book that you're reading and the type of literature that it is, it has to be handled differently. For instance, when we read books like Daniel, or even some of the major prophets, or you read some of Revelation, okay, listen, this cannot be taken literally. So much of these books are prophetic. They are symbolic. The beast with the heads, and the bear, and the leopard, and all these things coming out of the ocean, and all. We're not saying that the Bible is not teaching that these things are literally going to happen. But I'm confident there are probably people out there that say, no, it's definitely going to happen, because they are literalists and they take it literally. You can't do that. You simply cannot do that. You have to understand what you're reading. So my question is, when we read this, Isaiah chapter 66, and specifically in verse 17, can we take it literally? And if so, then my question, and this is the question I would ask to an Adventist. I would ask them, so when you read this verse 17, you're taking that literally? And wait for their answer. Now, so are they implying then that in the future, and that's another thing about this passage, is it is clearly a futuristic type of a passage, but how far in the future? Are we talking 200 years in the future? Are we talking 200,000 years in the future? How far in the future are we talking about? Because some people have looked at this text and take Isaiah's writings to talk about that there's going to be a time when God is going to judge Israel. There's going to be a time, some will say that the kingdom of Israel is going to be reestablished on earth. And there are some sections of this where people take those sections and say, this is about the second coming. Well, which one is this? Because I'm telling you right now, I'm unclear. I'm unclear about that, but I'm okay with that. I need you to know that I'm okay being unclear, because I've not studied it enough. I've studied this for like the past couple hours. Okay. I looked at this as an Adventist. You kidding? I looked at this as an Adventist all the time. But over the last couple hours, I decided to take a look at it, but I've not looked too in depth about how far in the future it is. But I don't need to know that. The bottom line, though, is I need to understand if I should take this literally or not. So to the Adventist who says, I'm going to take this literally, my next question would be, okay, so it's literal. Yeah. Okay. So verse 17 is literal. Yeah, it's literal. Okay. What about verse 24? Because verse 24 says, and they shall go out and look on the dead bodies of the men who have rebelled against me. For their worm shall not die, their fire shall not be quenched, and they shall be an abhorrence to all flesh. Adventists believe in soul sleep. Adventists believe in annihilationism as far as hell is concerned. So these verses right here directly contradict that idea. So my question again to the Adventists, well, is Isaiah chapter 66 literal or is it figurative? Now, someone might say, well, Scott, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot then. Are you saying that they're both figurative, or one is figurative and what? I'm telling you that I think the entire thing is figurative. I think the entire thing is a sort of almost not poetry, but it is probably more symbolic. But I do not believe for 1 second that this is all literal. I don't know, reading over verse 16, if there's, the thing is, even with figurative, there is still a truth behind it. But when we start grabbing little bits and pieces and words and saying, that's literally going to happen, or that's literally what they're going to look like, or that's literally, I don't agree with that. So I tend to look at this and think this is figurative. This is figurative. So what is the definition of figurative? Something that is not to be interpreted literally, but that instead uses a symbol or a likeness. So that's what I read here. And so when we hear about in verse 17, following one in the midst, eating pig's flesh, and the abomination and mice shall come to an end together, declares the Lord. I think that what you're having here is it's not literally saying there's going to be people and it's because they're eating pig's flesh, or they're eating mice, or they're eating abomination, which most commentators are attributing to unclean foods. I don't think that that's what this is actually talking about. I think this is all figurative. Now, let me tell you contextually why I believe that these verses, especially verse 17, is more figurative. It's actually found in another book of the Bible entirely, in the New Testament. No, just kidding. I'm going to take you to the beginning of chapter 66 of Isaiah. Now, I am reading from the English Standard Version, okay? But at the beginning of this chapter, Isaiah 66, this is what is written. Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. Now listen to what he says. But this is the one to whom I will look. But this is the one to whom I will look. Now, this word look here, or this sentence, is getting to the idea of this is the type of person that I regard highly. What is the kind of person? He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. And now he changes. Now he changes his focus. He who slaughters an ox. He who slaughters an ox. He who presents a grain offering. Now, these terms, slaying an ox, sacrificing a lamb, it kind of brings to one's mind Judaism or Israel, because this is something that they common did. But verse 3 says, he who slaughters an ox is like one who kills a man. He who sacrifices a lamb like one who breaks a dog's neck. He who presents a grain offering like one who offers pig's blood. He who makes a memorial offering of frankincense like one who blesses an idol. These have chosen their own ways, and their soul delights in their abominations. I also will choose harsh treatment for them and bring their fears upon them, because when I called, no one answered. When I spoke, they did not listen, but they did what was evil in my eyes and chose that in which I did not delight. Now I'm going to stop there, not because the next verse suddenly turns on me or anything like that. My point is, the context of this verse is Isaiah, through the inspiration of God, is writing about a contrast between the people who God reveres, those who are humble and contrite in spirit. And he says, those who do these, and I'm talking about like offering an ox, sacrificing a lamb, grain offering, memorial offering. He says those who do those things, he all of a sudden comes in with this thing like it's like breaking a dog's neck. It's like somebody who kills a man. It's like someone who is blessing an idol, who is offering pig's blood. So the context here is him contrasting is him contrasting what he truly wants and what he's getting sick of, and the thing that kind of turns his literal stomach. Now, when we go over to starting in verse 15, the passage again kind of takes a break. And this is where he says, "For behold, the Lord will come in fire, and his chariots like the whirlwind, and render his anger and fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire will the Lord enter into his judgment, and by his sword with all flesh, and those slain by the Lord shall be many." And now he goes in. Those who sanctify and purify themselves to go into the gardens. Let's stop there. What is this bringing to mind, this idea of gardens? Because if I take this literally, I shouldn't go into gardens. Come on now. It is a conceptual thing. If you read the commentaries, you'll read about them in gardens. They had these special gardens for idol worship. They had special gardens for idol worship. So those who would sanctify and pure themselves to go in for that, those who are doing everything they can to clean themselves to go in for this worship. Okay, those who do this, following one in the midst, eating pig's flesh and the abomination and mice, shall come to an end together, declares the Lord. There is a part of me that thinks, I feel, that this is still figurative, and that this reminds me of when Jesus said, "You are turning the house of God into a market." And he is almost saying these people are doing this stuff week in and week out. They're going to the temple, but their hearts are far from me. You see, when he goes back here at the beginning of verse 60 of chapter 66, slaughtering an ox, where does that happen? The temple. Sacrificing a lamb, where does that happen? A temple. Presenting a grain offering, a memorial offering, where do these things happen? A temple. And to God, it's like people who would be sanctifying and purifying themselves just to go into a garden for idol worship. And not only that, the people that they are following, that's what the verse is saying. For those who sanctify and purify themselves to go into the gardens, following one in the midst, eating pig's flesh and the abomination and mice shall come to an end together, declares the Lord. He's saying there are people who are leading you astray. There are people who are telling you to do these things, and you're going right along with it. And it's all disgusting to me, and you're going to be judged for it. The contrast is those who are humble and contrite in spirit, and the opposite. And the opposite is what Jesus actually ran into quite a bit. Would you not agree with that? Isaiah is talking about that. But Isaiah is not pointing to something literal about people who eat swine. Now, the reason I say this, because I am of the firm opinion that this is not the case, that this is not about swine, but it is about people. And because of this is probably Jewish people who would never eat an unclean food in their life, but it didn't matter because their hearts were far from him, and they might as well have done that. When I read Acts chapter 15 and the Jerusalem Council, this is where towards the end of this chapter is where there's this order that's kind of given. This starts around verse 19 of Acts chapter 15. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. For my ancient generations, Moses has had in every city those who proclaim for who he is every Sabbath in the synagogues. Here's the point. When it comes to this matter of clean and unclean, I think that everybody needs to understand something. Here's the book of Acts written, and here's a person, I'm trying to remember who it was that was stating this, but I'm thinking this was Peter. Please, let me see if I can see here. And I'll listen to Paul as they I have to put it. James replied, brothers. Okay, so maybe this is James. I apologize. I didn't read into this. Adventists are judging me harshly as we speak. The point is, listen to what he says. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols and from sexual immorality. So let's start right there. The point I think I want to drive home to you is, after Christ, there was not true understanding of what was I not obligated to do anymore and what was I obligated to do anymore. In the Jerusalem Council, you have the disciples here, Jews who had lived under this law their entire lives. It was everything. All the law was their second nature, and they were still struggling through, what should I do? What shouldn't I do? What am I obligated to do? What am I not obligated to do? And even in this text, it would appear that perhaps they're getting it wrong. Now, I'm not coming down in judgment on the disciples. My point is this. He says here in verse 20, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols. Now, the Apostle Paul, as many of you know, wrote about this matter. And he said things like, I don't care if it is offered to an idol at all. Listen, when God blesses it, I can eat whatever I want. Now, he would say, I will abstain from it if it means a weaker brother. But this text right here cannot be taken to mean you're just supposed to, you have to avoid it at all costs, because Paul himself didn't do that. So the best I could do is to say that section there, we should abstain from it, would be at best for a weaker brother, which I'm in agreement with. But I refuse, because of Paul's writings, to say this means I can't eat food that's been offered as a sacrifice to an idol. No. Paul's writings tell me I can. Sexual immorality? No. This one, there can be nothing about, I'm going to abstain from sexual immorality so I don't make my brother fall. No, it is my God, my body belongs to God. I am not to use my body for the fleshly purposes. That's clear. That's not an abstaining for a brother. That is before God. I need to stay pure. And then he says, and from what has been strangled and from blood. I still think this section right here, and from what has been strangled and from blood, this right here is still going back to Levitical law, because the Jews knew that they had to prepare meat in a very specific way. Namely, there could be no blood in the animal at all. And if you strangle an animal, rather than slit its throat and let the blood drain properly, if you strangle it, the blood begins to seep into the muscle and into the meat, and it all of a sudden becomes unclean. But I do firmly believe that text is coming from still a place of, I've not yet fully understood. That's my opinion. That I think that even that text, because I don't think that I'm under Jewish law that I have to only eat kosher. Because I'll be honest with you, when I have a steak, I eat the steak medium. Now, I can't go medium rare or rare. That's just disgusting. But I also can't eat it well, because that's just like eating a shoe. That would be disgusting. But I eat it medium. Because I do not feel obligated. But this is what is also going on here in Acts, is that they're still trying to figure out what laws are they required. It still took time. It still took time for them to figure that out. But let me just point something out to you about, in my mind, somebody who it was very clear to, I think, earlier on. I think the person that it was the most clear to was Paul. I do believe that. I think that Peter, though, also was starting to get a clear, but the clarity that he got, he still couldn't really fathom it. Let me say that again. Peter, it was given to Peter very clearly, but it was so clear. It's like my brain is going to explode. I can't understand this. And let me give you the example. This is in Acts 10, verse 15. This is when he is talking about his vision. And he says in verse 15 of that, and the voice came to him again a second time, what God has made clean, do not call common. This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. Now, you all know this verse. And Adventists love this verse. Well, I don't know if they love this verse. The story is Peter is at the home of Cornelius. And while he is there, he goes up on the roof to have, I hope I said Peter, not Paul, but Peter's on the roof and he has a little nap and he has this vision. And in this vision presented to him is a large, let's just read it. He became hungry. So he was hungry. This is Acts 10, verse 10. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens open and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, said, Peter, rise, kill and eat. But Peter said, by no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice came to him again a second time. What God has made clean, do not call common. This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. Now, here's the thing. It says here, now, while Peter was inwardly perplexed as to what the vision had meant, here we go, that he had seen, what it might mean, behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry for Simon's house, stood at the gate. They called out, and into the house, let me see where it is, verse 19, behold, 3 men are looking for you. Question, how many times was he commanded, what I have made clean, do not call common? 3. How many men happened to come to the door? 3. Were they Jews or Gentiles? Gentiles. How did Jews view Gentiles? Unclean. Do not consider anything unclean that I have made clean. That is the idea here. Now, to the Adventist, their answer is, but what you have to understand is, he was saying no longer are the Gentiles. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe Jesus spoke in parables? Yes, you do. Of course you do. You're very wise people. You know that Jesus spoke in parables. Next question. Would Jesus have ever spoken in a parable and used a parable that was untrue to speak a truth? I'll wait. The answer is no. Any parable that Jesus would have used was a true parable. When I say true parable, I'm not saying that it necessarily actually happened, but it is true. There are good principles in there. So we think about the prodigal son, we think about this sower, we think about on and on and on. Nowhere do I find a parable in which Jesus has promoted a story that is a lie to tell us or to teach us a lesson. When I read this story, what am I to conclude? I'm to conclude that it is true that when God said, that which I've made clean, do not call unclean, it clearly applied to the Gentiles. It also applied to Levitical law and dietary. God is saying, listen, when Christ died, he had fulfilled all law. And this whole concept of clean and unclean and coming to the temple and not coming to the temple, when Christ died and the veil was torn from the top to the bottom, it's the end of the ceremonial sacrificial system. Because to do it any longer is ridiculous. To do it any longer is an insult to God. And now all men can come to him. This is what in Romans, in Christ there is no longer Jew or Gentile, male or female, on and on and on. Okay? There's no more of this separation. It is now bringing everything together. So my point to you is this. The laws, the dietary laws are no longer being held. And this is the one that kills me, is Adventists want to tell me, yes, but it's healthier. I'm not arguing with you. I'm not arguing with you if it's healthy, if it's healthier not to eat pork or bacon or shrimp. I'm not arguing that point. I'm arguing whether I am obligated. Whether I am obligated. I'm arguing whether or not God has said it is permissible. And I cannot find, and I'm trying to think exactly how long since I've been out of Adventism, I cannot find adequate scriptural support to indicate to me that a new believer is obligated to adhere to the dietary laws. Cannot find it. Therefore, I will not follow that. If my doctor tells me, Scott, your diet is really bad, your salt is really high, and you need to cut out pork, okay. But you know what else I'd do? If he told me I had to stop drinking root beer, love root beer. Okay, well, if it's going to be for my health, I'll stop drinking it. Not because it's going to save me, not because I'm obligated, because I'm not obligated even to the doctor. If he tells me I need to work out more, if I need to walk more, I hope he doesn't, but if he does tell me that, I will do those things, but I'm not obligated. So I hope that this makes sense. I hope that that this helps you. I will tell you right now, I don't want anybody getting their hopes up. The Adventist isn't going to accept your explanation. They're not going to accept your explanation because the Adventist needs this. Okay. The other thing that they do, I'm sorry, I should come back to Isaiah 66 because the other thing that they do here in Isaiah 66, let me grab it really quick here, is they love, because I said they mentioned the Sabbath here. They go to verse 22 of this chapter. For as the new heavens and the new earth that I make shall remain before me, so says the Lord, so shall your offspring and your name remain. From new moon to new moon and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, declares the Lord. They take this one too, and they for some reason feel that they can put this right in heaven. So this is a heaven thing. So in heaven we will keep the Sabbath. Well, that's really not what it says. That's really not what it says. What you need to understand. Now I'm going to use that. What we have to understand is what kind of book. Okay, what kind of book is this again? Is this literal or is this prophetic? Or is it poetic? You follow what I'm saying? And in this case, what I'm seeing here. So let's go ahead and say that it's in heaven. Okay, fine. The same people who want to say there is no time in heaven, but they want me to believe that there's new moons and there's weeks. Okay, whatever. What this is saying to me is month by month and week by week, all flesh shall come to worship before me. And I agree with that. I believe that in heaven, we will be in a continual state of worship. Okay, I believe that it will be just like it was in the Garden of Eden prior to sin. Man lived in continual communion with God prior to sin. So I believe that one day we will absolutely return to that. But you are going far, 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 far too far to imply that this indicates that in heaven we're still going to keep the Sabbath. That's not what this text is even trying to say. So right to the point, right? The point is not whether it is healthy or not. Right. The point is not whether it's healthy or not. Right. I think I know what you're saying, Shelley. I'm sorry. So with that being said, I hope that this helps you. But again, as I was saying a moment ago, don't expect this to change an Adventist's mind, because it's not. This is absolute my opinion on the matter. Christ himself said, to those who have ears, let them hear. Many of the Adventists that you are going to deal with, maybe some of that are listening to me right now, you're not prepared to hear this. I know that I wasn't. When I was an Adventist, I remember when a pastor in the Ohio Conference, his name is Greg Taylor, and he left the Adventist church. I wasn't prepared. I read some of his stuff about the new covenant and all that kind of stuff. I'm thinking, this guy's crazy. This guy's been handed over to the devil. That's what I thought. I was not able to be able to read or to reason through the things that God had to tell me. But God had to wait until a certain day until he could open my eye on one thing. And it just so happened to be pork. And once he opened my eye on one thing, suddenly I was open to think, okay, well, maybe my denomination isn't flawless. You know, you'll hear a lot of Adventists say things like, well, we know our church is not perfect. Now, I don't think that they believe that. I think that it is an attempt to remain or to sound somewhat humble and but I don't believe that they see theologically that it's imperfect. I do believe that they believe theologically they are perfect. That's why you hear them. Adventism is the closest to the Bible. Well, it's the closest to the Bible. Yet I don't doubt you have scriptures for your stuff, but you're misinterpreting it. You're taking it out of context. You're doing violence to the scripture. I believe that. But to an Adventist like I was, if you think for 1 second that you're going to be able to show them this video and it's going to change their mind, it's not. It takes the intervention of God alone. It takes the intervention of God alone. So if you want to think or pray about this, that needs to be it. You need to be praying that God will open their heart and open their mind, that they truly be born again. That's the only thing that can happen. I don't think we keeping the Sabbath in heaven because we rest in it. Correct. I mean, I think that we're in a continual state of rest. Not, I don't know, like Monday through, Sunday through Friday, we're doing something, and then Saturday we stop doing whatever we're doing. No. We're continually rest. Jesus desires mercy, not sacrifice and self-denial. Correct. So all that to say, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. If you could do me a favor and subscribe, I would appreciate it. Thank you guys for hanging out with me tonight. I hope this was helpful, and we will see you next time, probably from sunny Ohio. So God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.